It sounds like, looking at the programme, you've seen a whole range of different aspects of ancient festivals, moving from the kind of archaic and classical periods up to the Roman period. And in Eleanor's lecture just now, we've started thinking about kind of representation of Greek athletics in Latin literature. I'm just going to move it down slightly because I'm deafening myself as well. So what I want to do in my paper, my talk, is to kind of trace some of that historical development, really, between the archaic and classical Greek period and the into the Roman Empire up to about the 3rd century AD, and to think about how Greek festival culture developed and changed over that period. So, I guess the first thing is just to sort of sum up some of the things you've probably already found out about Greek festivals. So what sorts of festivals were there? Well, there were Pan-Hellenic festivals, like the big festival at Olympia and on Zeus, the Pythian Games at Delphi, the festivals at Nemea and Isthmia, and those are open to all Greeks, and they're very much about sort of bringing people together from around the Greek world. And then there are also regional or local games, such as the Panathenaea at Athens, for example, which have a more restricted kind of contestants, range of contestants. And those two types of games also relate to the different prizes that are given at festivals for the competitions that people win at festivals. So we have the sacred crown games, which primarily award a prize of a crown, so a crown of olive at Olympia, but also bring very prestigious rewards and recognition from the home city of the victorious athlete. So those are the sort of the top pinnacle, the most important games at one level. But then we also have prize games where they award monetary prizes to the victors. And that might include things like the valuable olive oil that you win in the Panathenaea. In the Roman period, it can involve kind of bags of money that are given to successful athletes and other performers. So you have a kind of hierarchy of festivals which roughly maps onto this idea of there being kind of international Pan-Hellenic festivals and more local ones. But even the local ones, as time goes on, kind of invite athletes and performers from around the Greek world to compete in them. It's just that they're giving them monetary prizes rather than giving them kind of more symbolic prizes. And so what we find from the Hellenistic period onwards is that we get sort of local festivals that are often upgraded to become Pan-Hellenic and sacred, and we find these titles, Olympic and Pythian, added to festivals, which essentially mean that they're given a status equal to the Olympic Games or equal to the Pythian Games. So this is very much a kind of strategy whereby cities can try and elevate their religious festivals and increase the range of people who come and attend those festivals, both as theoroi, as sacred observers from other cities around the Greek world. So these are religious festivals, so people who recognise them will send kind of representatives to partake in sacrifices, and also to attract a wider range of performers as well. So we start to find this kind of Mediterranean-wide festival culture. And this kind of also maps onto the expansion of Greek cultural identity over this long period. So even in the 5th century BC, to be a competitor at Olympia, you are supposed to be Greek. And there's this nice quotation from Herodotus where he's talking about Alexander I of Macedon competing at Olympia. And people initially kind of opposing this. So he says that when Alexander wanted to contend in the Olympic Games, the Greeks who were about to run against him, his competitors, would have excluded him, saying that only Greeks were allowed to contend, not barbarians. But Alexander proved that he was an Argive, he had Argive descent, and therefore he was a Greek. And he is duly allowed to compete. So we can see that this kind of idea of contesting what Greekness is and linking the right to participate and to compete at the Olympic Games with your right to be called a Greek. And over time, this definition of Greekness expands. So in the 5th century BC, Macedon is a bit dodgy. Do they count as Greeks or not? Alexander manages to persuade people he does because his ancestors come from Argos. But over time, particularly in the wake of the conquests of Alexander the Great, when the Hellenistic world, the Greek world becomes wider, we start finding Greek cities settled around all the way into places like Bactrium or Afghanistan, those sorts of areas, then this definition of Greekness also expands. And you can see this really nicely if you look at, both by looking at the people who are competing at Olympia and other Panhellenic festivals, and then also by looking at the areas around the Mediterranean that start to put on Greek-style festivals. So if we look at the first one, if we look at attested Olympic victors, and we always have to be a little bit careful about evidence. We can only talk about people who are mentioned in our sources, in inscriptions or in texts. Doesn't mean that there weren't people competing that didn't record that in one way or another. So this is partly about who wants to record that they're going to Olympia, as well as it is about who's actually going to Olympia. But if we map the attested Olympic victors, then we can see there's quite an interesting change over time. So if you look at the sort of archaic classical period, most of the people who are victorious at Olympia are, that we find out in about our Olympic victory lists or setting up statues, come from either mainland Greece or Magna Graecia, so South Italy and Sicily. And the top two bands there, the green and the sort of burgundy-coloured band, Asia Minor and North Africa, Egypt and North Africa, quite a small proportion. Over time, what we find is that proportion coming from mainland Greece, particularly the Peloponnese, which is the biggest proportion that we have in the earlier period, shrinks and more people start competing who come from Asia Minor, so the area of modern-day Turkey, and also, particularly in the Roman period, Egypt and North Africa and Greece as well. So that shows that the kind of significance of an Olympic victory is spreading out. It doesn't necessarily mean that people aren't competing from places like Sicily and South Italy anymore, although we don't hear much about them. There's a few of them. But it becomes less important for them to celebrate their victories and more important for people from, say, Egypt to do so instead. And we can see this in the inscriptions that we have. We have inscriptions that come from Olympia itself, from statue bases that people set up to commemorate their victories, and also from other cities around the ancient world as well. And also from Pausanias' discussion of the site of Olympia. Pausanias is visiting in the 2nd century AD, so he's writing quite a while after a lot of the events he depicts. But he talks about the statues he can see on display in the sanctuary. And so he talks about this statue of Antipater of Miletus. Miletus is a city on the western coast of Turkey, Asia Minor. And this guy, Antipater, who won a victory, and some Syracusans tried to bribe him to call himself a Syracusan, or bribe his father to have the son proclaimed a Syracusan. And Antipater refused to do this and said, "No, I'm Milesian. I want to assert my pride in being Milesian." And he wrote upon his statue he was a Milesian, and the first Ionian to dedicate his statue at Olympia. And Ionia is this area of western Asia Minor, so it's not mainland Greece, it's sort of the Greek settlements on the coast of western Turkey. And over time we find this kind of statement, first of a particular region, becoming much more popular in inscriptions from the 4th century BC through the rest of the Hellenistic period and into the Roman period. So we have an inscription from Olympia, this one here, IPO 184, which talks about Acestorides, the first of the Trojans to win an Olympic victory. Which is interesting actually in the Life of Eleanor's talk, because this idea of are Trojans Greeks or not Greeks is quite a kind of an interesting question. By this point, this Trojan is clearly Greek enough to compete at Olympia. So this is sort of interesting in terms of identities. And then we also find Pausanias talking about someone called Sadamas of Assos, who is the first of the Aeolians, which again is the sort of region just between the Mysia, which is where ancient Troy is, and Ionia in Western Asia Minor. So this kind of expansion of victors can also be seen paralleled by the expansion of festivals. So there's some really nice maps that you can generate through this connected context database, which is a project that's being run by colleagues from the University of Birmingham. And you can kind of set the date ranges you want to look at, and it will tabulate the evidence that we have for festivals and for victors. So if you look at the map for by 500 BC, which is the one on the left, you can see that all of the attestations are kind of clustered in mainland Greece. This show, no, it's not. I'm not pointing. So they're clustering in mainland Greece, whereas if you go a little bit later, 300 years later, by 200 BC, you can see that's starting to spread out. So the red dots are references to festivals. So they start to spread out into the area that's North Asia, which is actually Asia Minor, so what we think of as modern-day Turkey, and also into Egypt. And then if you look into the 3rd century AD in the Roman period, you can see this is spread out massively. So we've now got festivals taking place in Italy. These are Greek-style festivals taking place in Italy, particularly Naples and Rome, all over mainland Greece still, lots in Asia Minor, areas like Bithynia and Pontus on the kind of south coast of the Black Sea, and also in the Near East as well, so areas like Syria and the Levant. So it's really expanding. And in a sense, you can kind of map Greek cultural identity expanding by looking at these festivals. So what I want to do in the sort of the rest of the talk is essentially give you a couple of examples of the way that this festival culture spreads out, particularly in the Roman period, and what it might have meant to people. So we're going to look at the institution of Greek-style festivals in Rome and in Italy, and the representation of those in mosaic evidence in Italy, and then at the end I'm going to look at one example of the representation of festivals from a city in Asia Minor in the sort of Greek half of the Roman Empire. And one of the things to think about in the Roman period is kind of the Romans are always adopting elements of Greek culture, but do those aspects of Greek culture mean the same thing to the Romans that they mean to Athenians who live in Roman Athens, for example? Do they mean different things? And of course, we have to think about who do we mean by Romans, who do we mean by Greeks, because there's lots of people moving around the Mediterranean period as well. But what we find if we look at the festival culture of Italy is that we start to find the introduction of Greek-style festivals with athletic contests from really the period of Augustus. So before that, there are Romans who occasionally compete at games. We have Tiberius competing at Olympia, for example, and we also have Augustus setting up a new Greek-style contest, Greek-style agon at Nicopolis after his to celebrate his victory over Mark Antony. But the institution of games kind of in Italy is something that starts under Augustus and then really picks up under Nero and under Domitian. So under Augustus we have the Sebasta festival, which is started at Naples. Naples is an interesting city because it's a Greek, traditionally it was a Greek colony, so it is, and it still very much maintains that kind of Greek identity into the Roman period. So if you've read any Suetonius on Augustus, it's where Augustus is said at the sort of final years of his life to have gone and watched the athletes, to the, sort of the Greek youths training, and to encourage a kind of cultural cross-dressing. So it gets the Greeks dressed up as Romans and the Romans dressed up as Greeks. And all of the inscriptions, most of the inscriptions of the city are still published in Greek in this period as well, in the 1st century. So it very much, although it's within Italy, unified Italy by this point, it is still maintaining its kind of Greek identity. So possibly to find Greek-style festival in there is not so unusual, but it's called the Sebasta, which means that it is in honour of Augustus. So Sebasta is the Sebastos is the kind of Greek version of Augustus. So it's very much associated with honouring the imperial family as well. And we know that lots of emperors actually attended in person, so we've got quite good evidence for people like Titus, for example, the emperor acting as what's known as the Agonothetes, which is the sort of the person who organises and presides over the games. And then in Rome itself, the first Greek-style festival we have is the Neronia, which is introduced by Nero in AD 60, and then it only runs once again in AD 65, and then it's sort of discontinued after his death. And then we have another one, the Capitoline Festival, which is instituted by Domitian in honour of the Capitoline Triad, so Jupiter, Juno and Minerva, from AD 86, and that then runs on a 4-year cycle ever afterwards. So it's what's known as a Pentenec Festival, which means every 5 years, which essentially means every 4 years the way we count, because the Greeks counted the beginning year and the end years. So they call them Pentenec, we think of them as 4-yearly festivals. And there are more that are instituted in the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD as well. So the Neronia seems to have caused a certain amount of kind of consternation amongst Romans. So Tacitus, who's obviously writing a bit later, 2nd century AD, but looking back, gives us this nice debate in the Senate between kind of the moralists who think that this is going to be terrible, lead to kind of awful decline in morals and the sort of standards of the youth, and those who support it. So for the opponents of this festival, we're told that it's going to kind of lead to moral breakdown. Traditional morals have been utterly ruined by this imported laxity. It makes everything potentially corrupting and corruptible flow into the capital. Foreign influences demoralise our young men into shirkers, gymnasts and perverts. Gymnasia et utia et turpis amores is the Latin. And the Roman, a lot of these kind of Roman literary sources particularly paint a contrast between athletics in the gymnasium and athletics as a training for war. So it's okay if you're wrestling on the battlefield as a soldier to sort of improve your physique, but it's not okay if you're doing it for competition. And particularly there's very much this divide between the idea of performance and the social status of people who perform. So in kind of Roman thinking, to be an actor, for example, is infames, it's lowly, it's kind of suspect. And so the idea that, and the sources tell us this, the idea that in Greece it was noble to be an athlete and to be watched and to compete in front of spectators is completely opposite to the way this is thought about in traditional Roman thinking, where it is kind of, it's infamia to make yourself a spectacle. So there's very much this distinction, which is sort of breaking down over the course of the 1st century AD, but is still there in the rhetoric and in the literary sources. But if we think of Juvenal writing at the end of the 1st century AD, it sounds as though actually this kind of encouragement to go to the gymnasium exercise is already happening by the 1st century, the late 1st century AD. So he, again, it's a satire, but he talks about this Roman who goes around the baths with prizes of victory on his neck. And he uses the Greek word nicoteria, so he uses the Latin version of the Greek word to give this idea that this is a kind of Greek habit. So I wanted to show you some examples of this in the visual evidence to think, I guess, about what the response to this was. So we have the literary sources which generally paint a rather hostile impression of this institution of Greek athletics in Rome as part of festivals, and then the way that that sort of encourages people to take up Greek athletic training as well. But if we look at it in terms of visual evidence, it's actually a much more sort of positive picture, I think. And so this suggests that two things really, both that Romans are interested in successful Greek athletes, so professional athletes who were kind of attending these festivals, particularly things like the Capitoline Games, and also that they were kind of keen to adopt some of these practices in their own social life as well. So we've got evidence, and it's mostly from the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD. We've got evidence from Ostia of this nice mosaic which comes from an inn, and it's actually alongside other scenes of entertainment. So we've got some dancers and things like that, gymnasts, and we've got this pair of athletes who are engaged in a contest called the Pancratium, which is sort of like a combination of boxing and wrestling. It's often described as all in wrestling, where you can do absolutely anything to your opponent apart from bite them and gouge them in the eyes. Other than that, everything goes. So it's quite a violent form of contest. And these two figures who are represented, they're labelled above as Alexander and Helix. And we know from the inscriptions that those two names were the names of successful Pancratiasts of the 2nd century AD. And in fact, in another mosaic from Puteoli, we find them represented here. So on the left, we've got Helix, we've lost the H here, and on the right, we've got Alexander, and then this other figure called Magira, who again seems to be doing the Pancratium. And here they are shown on either side of the central scene, where we've got kind of a table or a pillar with a large crown on the top of it, and a label above which tells us that this is the Eusebeia festival, which is a festival that Antoninus Pius set up at Puteoli in honour of Hadrian after Hadrian's death. So we've got lots of attributes of victory here. We've got a very long palm branch, which is the kind of the prize of victory. We've got a vessel with a couple of smaller palm branches in it as well, so there's sort of symbols of victory. And we have the names of these successful athletes. So we get the idea that kind of people are interested in looking at the athletic contests that take place in festivals as kind of part of their spectacle culture. But also I think that they're then making a link between that watching these successful big names on the, in the arena or in the stadium as part of festivals, with what they're actually doing themselves in their private life and their social life. So we've got a whole series of mosaics that come from bath complexes, and they're usually positioned in the area that is right next to the exercise part of the bath complexes that celebrate Greek-style athletic competitions. So, and you might wonder why these things are Greek-style. Well, partly it's the nakedness that Greek athletics compete naked, and Roman athletes are said to have worn a loincloth. So this seems to be kind of coded as being Greek nakedness. So here we've got originally 4 pairs of athletes, but we've only got sort of 2.5 of them left. The one at the top right was wrestling, the bottom right are a pair of Pancratiasts, and then the bottom left pair are boxers, and they're wearing these very scary looking boxing gloves with 2 sharp spikes on them, which are the form that the boxing glove takes in the Roman period, but seems to be actually kind of like an offensive weapon. And we have texts talking about people kind of bleeding and really being quite heavily injured by these gloves. So the gloves suggest that this is a kind of professional contest, and also the figures have these little locks of hair at the back of their heads, which are what known as the cirrus. It's kind of like a ponytail that is also associated with professional athletes. So that suggests that there's a kind of link maybe to people that they've seen competing in spectacles and games, but also the location of this then in the baths kind of links it to people who are actually exercising in the baths and just sort of competing in a more informal context. And there's also another inscription, I think I had better image of that, lost it, somewhere along the line, I've lost a slide, never mind. There's also a really nice mosaic which comes from Ostia, from another bath complex at Ostia, that's the Porta Marina, which again has a series of different athletes around it, including these 2, you can see on the right here, both carrying strigils. So this is the implement that you scrape your body with after you've been exercising before you go into the bath. So it kind of associates it with the training that you do as part of cleaning yourself at the baths. And we've got another one doing some weightlifting, but we've also got these kind of pair of boxers on the left-hand side, so you can only see one of them, there's the one behind was, who's sort of in the top left-hand corner, is kind of claiming his victory, and the other one is complaining to the umpire. And again, they wear those gloves with the spikes on them. And this is all set around a table which has a prize crown on it, which you can just see in the top of the screen. So this same kind of association of like professional athletes and the areas that athletics takes place in the baths
can be seen in the Vast of Caracalla from the early 3rd century in Rome, and you've got the remains of the Vast of Caracalla on the left. The area we're looking at on the map is the sort of semicircular spaces 13E and 13W, 13 East, 13 West, which match each other. And those are the spaces that you go through after you've been doing what exercises. So if you go to Vast, you work up the sweat in the Palaestra, which are the areas marked 12 on the map, and then you go through into the Frigidarium to do the bathing part of the ritual. And the mosaics from these two exedri, these two semicircular spaces, were paved with these very detailed mosaics of athletes. So this is what the excavation photo, or drawing rather, sort of represents them looking at like, and this is one of those which are represented in the Vatican museums now. And you can see you've got a whole range of these kind of very athletic-looking naked men. And so they are victors, they've got palm branches, they've got crowns, and in fact the crown on the left-hand side, which has 3 little protrusions on it, are probably the busts of Jupiter, Juno and Minerva, which we know was shown on the crown worn in the Capitoline Festival. So this links it perhaps with the festivals taking place in Rome itself. But I think that what's quite nice about this is that the direction of travel, so they are very much aligned to someone walking through from the Palaestra into the baths. And it, I think, kind of creates this idea that if you've just gone and done your workout in the Vast of Caracalla, then you're kind of stepping into the shoes of these very successful professional-looking athletes. So it's kind of encouraging people to make a link between what they're doing, which might just be a bit of throwing a ball to your neighbour, and these kind of successful professional athletes of the Roman period. And there's a few umpires there as well, who are the ones who are clothed. And also in the Vast of Caracalla we had some other statues, so it wasn't the statue on the left, but it was, they found fragments of a Discobolos statue, so the same version as the statue on the left of Discobolos, attributed to Myron. So this is a Roman copy of a Greek work by Myron from the 5th century, and then the Hercules Farnese statue on the right, which was found in the Vast of Caracalla. So, and I think if you compare Hercules' physique here with some of those heavily built, muscular athletes of the line before, you can see that there's this sort of sense of a link between kind of mythological athlete, wrestler, par excellence, Hercules, and the contemporary athletes, and then by association also, you know, the people who are competing in these baths themselves. Okay, and then I just wanted to sort of finish really with a quick discussion of the theatre at Hierapolis, which is gives you a kind of different take on the matter. So I think in Rome, what you see is that people are interested in athletics as a spectacle, and they're interested in celebrating kind of professional athletes, but usually ones who aren't actually Romans. And most of our evidence suggests that the athletes who are competitive, successful in Rome actually come from the East. But that people might have been kind of doing some athletics in the gym, in the baths, as part of their everyday training, social life, that sort of thing. Whereas if we think about the situation in the Greek East, particularly cities in mainland Greece and in Asia Minor and Turkey, then it's much more tied in, festivals are much more tied in with kind of civic culture, civic identity and sort of ancestral traditions. So this is Theatre at Hierapolis, which is in sort of the western Asia Minor but inland, and it was dedicated at the beginning of the 3rd century AD. It's a brilliant site. It's near the city of Pamukkale. When anyone's ever been to Turkey, it's one of those cities that often gets shown on the tourist photos because it's got wonderful travertine pools. But it's got a brilliant site attached to it if you go there. So on this theatre, the whole series of reliefs, but the relief above the central doorway very much is this kind of celebration of Hierapolis' festival. And what we have here is a table in the centre of this
scene with a very large cylindrical object, which is actually a prize crown. This is the form that prize crowns take in the Roman period. Similar to the type that we see on coins, which you can see from one above. And this suggests that they're celebrating their festival to the god Apollo, who also appears on coins of Heracles. So the one on the left is Apollo standing by a table with a prize crown on it. So this is a festival that the city hosts in honour of Apollo, who is their ancestral god, and also the god to whom the theatre is dedicated. And on the left-hand part of this relief, there's a whole series of local personifications which kind of celebrate the fact that this festival is taking place at Heracles in the local area. But on the right-hand side, we have the imperial family. So this is, at this point, the Severian imperial family. So the Emperor Septimius Severus, who is shown... I'm using the wrong mouse, that's working. So he's shown here, sort of seated and being crowned by a knightly figure, and then he's surrounded by the rest of his family. So his wife, Domna, here, and his two sons, Caracalla and Gita. And Gita is later murdered by his brother and suffers a damnatio memoria, sort of eradication of his memory. So he's been cancelled later on, he's been shipped away, so he doesn't exist. Although we still remember that he's been cancelled because the sort of remains of his figure there. So we have the imperial family, we have the festival crown, probably a little image of the god himself here, now lost. And so this is celebrating both kind of the old and the new, I guess. So you've got this long-standing traditional cult of the god Apollo, but also the imperial family of the day, who are kind of in overall charge. Yes, so that's just some other sort of more detailed version of that. We know the identity of a lot of these figures because of the inscriptions on this theatre, so they're all names of the various figures were inscribed above the relief on the architrave, as you can see here. And then this is a close-up of Septimius Severus and his family on the right. And then the other bits of this relief sort of allude to various different parts of the festival. So they talk about the athletic contests through representations of the different ages of athletic contests. So men would compete in different categories, as boys, as youths, as men, and all three of those seem to be represented here. Particularly we have the Pithekos, who is the boy being crowned as a victor here, and not very nice, a world-surviving figure, but a figure who's marked as Aner, as a man, so he's probably like the adult category. We also have the trumpeter, who celebrates the victors when their names are called out. And then we have, as well as the athletes who are represented through these different age categories, we also have the artistic, theatrical contests represented here too, through the figure of the personification of the guild of athletes, of actors, sorry. So this is a guild who kind of represents the embodiment of all of the different performers and musicians and actors. And we know that she's representing the actors in particular because of the mask that's being held here. And in fact, there was also representation of this figure elsewhere in the theatre. So the synod, the local synod, or the guild of actors at Heracles, also set up statues in honour of local poets and things like that. We found those in the theatre. And then the other aspect of the sacrifice of the festival that's celebrated is this sort of community bringing people together, international side of the festivals that I mentioned at the beginning. So this idea that if you have a festival and you manage to get it given Pan-Hellenic status, which in the Roman period you need the emperor to kind of authorise for you, then you can attract lots of people, lots of visitors from across the area to come and celebrate with you. And so there's three reliefs that celebrate what's known as Symphysia or Cumanes, or kind of common sacrifice of the inhabited world, which you see on this one. We've got the two figures above the figure of the bull who's been sacrificed. Again, we've got a figure here bringing the bull to sacrifice to stables above Symphysia. And we also have another sort of scene of this kind of sacrificial bull being brought before an altar as well. So at Hierapolis, there's, oh yes, this is the one that shows the synodus, who the sort of the guild making offerings at Hierapolis to their victorious after as well. And we also know, so at Hierapolis they're kind of alluding to a whole range of different aspects of the Greek festival. They're alluding to the artistic competitions, to the sacrifices which take place, to the athletes, and indeed in other cities around the Greek world, not at Hierapolis but at Aphrodisias, which is in the far away, we find victorious statues of victorious athletes set up in the theatre. So there's this idea of sort of commemorating your famous victors. And they're also celebrating the people who pay for these festivals and put them on and manage them. So we've also got this figure of the Agonothetes, the sort of organiser of the games, who's given quite a distinctive face, which could be a portrait of an actual individual of the period. So it's a much more kind of holistic view of festivals, I suppose, if we look at Hierapolis, compared to the material evidence from Rome and Italy, where it's particularly the kind of spectacle side of Greek athletic festival culture, which they're really interested in. And indeed, the Agonothetes himself, who's represented here, would actually have been sitting in the theatre at Hierapolis on these honorific seating. So the real life embodiment of the person who's represented in the relief would have been sitting down there. So there's a nice kind of play between the images that you see and the actual activities that are going on in the theatre. Okay, so thank you very much. I haven't gone too long, I hope, so no people have to go get places. But I hope you've had a good day, and we wish you all the best for getting home. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them. Thank you.